to be talking with you and walking you through MLA documentation. Modern Languages Association documentation is used most often in English courses, but also quite a few foreign language studies will use it. Sometimes philosophy will use it. Sometimes other humanities kind of courses like history and such will use it. They have other options, and so it just depends upon how much work, extra work they want to do to get you used to that. Our English courses typically give you MLA in the first course and then APA, American Psychological Association's um, citation system in the second course. So today I'm going to walk through MLA. If you have this book, the Little Seagull Handbook, I'm going to start a little bit in here on page 122. Just for some in-text stuff. You also might have MLA documentation, MLA templates, I think is what I call it on our class page. You can have that out to take some notes from or to just kind of follow along with. MLA is biggest kind of focus is on the author and what they say. We're not as interested in or concerned about the currency of the information. We're still studying folks from the classical era, 300 BC, farther back than that for some folks as well. And we still talk about Shakespeare and all kinds of things. So we're not as worried about whether it was published this year or 500 years ago. And so the currency part is not as big a deal with MLA as it is with APA. Now, when you get into pedagogy and talking about how to teach and what we teach and why we teach it this way kind of thing, those things are interested in being current or looking at a particular era. So you can look at a lot of things from different perspectives by checking out their dates, of course. But the big thing for MLA is who said it and how can I find it. And so in your in-text citations, and I have another video that walks through when to cite, what to cite, that kind of stuff. And I'll hit that briefly here, but there's a whole other video for that if you need help in that area with paraphrasing and such. And of course, it's also covered in our little book, so that helps. MLA documentation is not hard. It is picky. What piece of information goes next is a big deal. And so it's going to test your attention to detail just a little, but keep on with it. Make your good stabs, make arrangements. Fix things, make revisions, and it'll be fine. Don't worry too horribly much. For MLA, we want a paper that is double spaced. We want a specific amount of stuff on the first page. We don't do title pages. We do a citation page, which is called the Works Cited. Even if there's just one on there, WORKS cited. And that format is also in your book, page 158. And following, there's a nice little sample paper there. I've also put a couple sample papers up on our Blackboard site, and our LMS site, so you can get there and have fun with that too. Kind of look and see one that is already done. One thing you have to remember is no matter what you're citing, anytime you borrow information, use somebody else's ideas or wording, you need to cite that. Basically, give them credit for having the idea first or having the idea said in a better way. And so every time you do that, you're going to use authors' last names. We don't do the Miss, Mr., Ma'am, whatever. Don't use the poet's first name. You don't know Emily Dickinson. Don't call her Emily. And it's one of those things where we're pretty good at doing it for men. We have a harder time doing it for women. And so that's one of the areas where we can work on our own show of equality and how we do that. Always last names. For your citation, we do something called parentheticals. And all that means is we put that information in parentheses, the little round brackets. And it's very specific. You don't use punctuation, or at least not very often, um, because everything goes in the same order all the time. So those of you who like patterns and things like that, this is definitely helpful pattern-wise. It's always last name and then the page number. With our proliferation of web sources, including peer-reviewed journals, talk about that in a little bit too, um, there may not be a page. Some of the time you might need to cite a paragraph. This is the 4th paragraph. This is the 27th paragraph, but not always, and not very often for the paragraph thing. So you just put N period, P period for no page, basically. It's like NA for not applicable. This particular mode of citation is something that we use across the board. APA uses it, CBE uses it, Chicago uses it, all those different styles still use parentheticals, and it's just a matter of how we put things together that separates them. So for MLA, anytime you have a summary or a paraphrase or general information that isn't readily known by everybody, not just Google, but everybody, you put the person's last name and the page number in a parenthetical at the end of the sentence, and then the period goes on the outside of that. Because that particular information belongs to the sentence that comes before it, and that's what a period means. We're done, right? So put the parenthetical in front of the period. On your handout, you have kind of a list of different things. If you have a really long quote, for MLA, if it's more than 4 lines, so if you get a word on that 5th line, you have to do something that's called a block quote, and that's just basically a double indent on the first side and no quotation marks. And there's a little example there. There's also examples in your little book. Make sure if you have used the author's name before, called a signal phrase, or like according to McCullough, then you don't need to put their name in the parentheses. If you haven't used a signal phrase like that, then yes, you do. If you have an unknown author, then you're going to use the title. And let me tell you one more thing about what goes in those parentheses. The rule and the reason for the little parentheses at the end that tells me, okay, Smith 96, Miss Smith on 96, page 96 said this, is so I can look at your Works Cited page and find that reference. We start the Works Cited page entry with the author's last name. And so if the author is not listed, which happens quite often on websites, then you're going to use the title of the article first. And instead of having an author's name in your parenthetical, you're going to have the first, either the first content word if it's a long title, or the title if it's not very long. So that helps us find things at the end. In your book, and if you're not using the little seagull, almost every handbook, most English books in general, have a section on MLA. It's going to walk through the same kinds of stuff. We are using the 8th edition of MLA, and so you'll have other things to look at as well. So part of the things that you're going to have to do for your papers is to make sure that you have a very good list of your resources, that you know which pieces come from what, and that was covered in our note-taking and all of that kind of stuff. Whether you color code it, whether you just write in the margins, whether you photocopy, whatever, print things out from the internet is fine. Part of your job then is to make sure that you're quoting the correct source, that you're pointing us to the correct source, and that everything that shows up in your paper also shows up on your Works Cited page, and vice versa. We only include the works that we actually cite. That's the title of the page, right? Works Cited. And so you have to make sure that they match. And we're going to get to a couple of things about that particular page in just a minute. There is a format to MLA style. It's very direct. It does allow for first person. Um, Most things, though, are going to be from a third person viewpoint. Make sure that you're using us and we when it's necessary. Don't use second person, which is you and your singular plural kind of stuff, um, mainly because that indicates that you're talking directly to your reader. And I think for most things, that's not true. Now, if you're asking your reader a question, by all means, what do you think about this kind of thing? Um, but otherwise, steer clear of second person. So, your document has to have every resource you use. You need to cite them. You need to cite them at the end. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. One of the things that you need to remember is that you will have, from other instructors especially, you will have a style sheet. They will tell you, I want you to do it this way. And if their this way is not MLA style, then you have to follow their directions. Most instructors will just tell you, oh, use MLA or use APA or whatever, and you're going to go find your handbook and look it up. If you don't have a handbook, your best resource is the Purdue OWL, OWL, their online writing lab, and it walks through everything you can practice. They have some exercises for you to do that will grade themselves, and it's a good place to be. When in doubt, go look. Now, I know some of you are going to say, but the library has this thing where it does the citation for you. That's fabulous. Check it. Make sure that it's actually giving you the right order, the right depth, picking the right elements for your particular source. That's on you. If you use a citation generator of any kind, make sure that you go back and check. Also, make sure that their formatting matches yours. If you're using, like you're supposed to, Times New Roman 12 point, and the citation system is using Calibri 10 point, fix it. Okay. Triple click out in the margin and then make everything the same font and the same size, and everything will be happy. One of the things I do want to walk through real quick is to show you, well, not show you per se, but on your Works Cited page, everything in your whole paper except for that first name block is double spaced. The name block is single spaced. It only goes on the first page. Don't put it in your header. Your header should be your last name and a space and the page number, and that's it. Your setup then for your Works Cited page is a different kind of format. It is a hanging indent, and you get that by clicking the little down arrow on the paragraph box on your tool at the top, and then the second box inside that box is for indentation, and you can make it whatever, it'll tell you what your choices, and you want to choose hanging. My advice to you is to type up your Works Cited page like everything else, and then highlight from the first entry all the way down to the last entry, and then click that little box and tell it to be hanging indent, and it'll just do it for you. It's all lovely. The other thing is you need to alphabetize your entries by the author's last name, or in cases where you don't have an author, the first content word. So not by a, and, or the, whatever the first, usually noun is, the normal way of doing things. Okay, so we're going to file that one in the N's, not the T's. So make sure that you're following the directions, that you're walking through the template that you have along with your documentation. There are at least 10 different ways to cite a source, and depends upon the source itself. If you have an article or a chapter in a book versus an article in a journal, versus an article in a newspaper or a popular magazine article, there's slightly different ways of doing things because they don't all have the same information. but they all start with the author and then the title of the article and then the publisher information, and the date is in there usually somewhere last, unless you need to do page numbers. Um, the last one on our template page is the one you'll probably use the most. Well, you might use the most. Is a citation for a web page. Now, for most of your college level writing papers, writing courses, you're going to need to do a peer reviewed journal. So many of those in a piece, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But for most of your other sources, you're going to find things on the internet, and you're going to want to cite them. And so it goes the same way. The author or the editor name, the article name in quotation marks, the title of the website underlined or italicized, any version numbers or anything like that that identifies this as, um, you know, the version that you actually looked at. Any kind of publisher information, usually that's going to be hard to find. Sometimes it's easier than others. Page numbers, if they have them, if they have something called a DOI, um, then that's a number that you can put in there, and it's like a hyperlink kind of idea. Um, or you put the URL, which starts with www dot whatever, and then the date you accessed it. We know that the internet changes on a minute-to-minute basis, and sometimes what you could find yesterday, you won't be able to find today, or at least not in the same spot. And so that's why you give me a URL, and that's why you tell me, oh, I looked at this source, January 3rd or whatever. And I'll know if I can't find it that I might have to do a little bit digging at the website. It's not because you're trying to fake a source for me. For your papers, for peer-reviewed journals, if you're going to go and look on the library website, and I would highly encourage you to skip Google and go straight to the library website and look at their databases, because their stuff, most of it will be of a higher caliber, written by experts, that kind of thing. That's a big deal, whether you want to believe that or not. But you're going to have a certain number of peer-reviewed articles. And all this means is that other folks that are experts in the field have looked at this and have said, yes, the information is correct, the research is correct. This person has shown us that they know what they're talking about, that kind of thing. A lot of them will be published in scholarly articles in journals, and the journal itself is kind of a way of peer reviewing things. But on the library website, when you go to search, do an advanced search. That way you can put in more parameters. But there's a little box you can click that says peer reviewed articles or peer reviewed only. And so you click that box, and that way you don't have to worry about, oh, did I get enough of those? Did I have that? And it's also going to limit your sources, so you don't have to read through quite so many, which is another reason to ditch Google and use the library website. The library website will have certain parameters on the searches, and so you'll have fewer things to dig through and less worry about whether or not the person telling you this actually knows what they're talking about. So there's that plug for the library. Walk through. If you end up with questions about a particular source or a particular citation, by all means send it along to me, and I'm more than happy to help out. This is not an exercise to crush you. This is kind of a pay attention to detail kind of assignment. And it has the same format all the time. If you look at your template and just look at each one, separately, you're going to see that the order is pretty much the same. It's the author, the publication itself, where it comes from, when it comes from, and where specifically do I find it. Everything is always in that order. What piece of information goes in each spot can vary from type of source to another, but that makes sense, right? But just keep in mind that this is not a way to beat you up. This is a way of learning conventions and figuring out how to talk to folks in this particular discipline or this particular idea set. And so your homework then um, is usually, um, and I say usually because you may not be taking this as a homework assignment. This particular assignment is an MLA documentation. Basically, I've given you 8 or 9 sources, and you have to make me a works cited page. Make sure you alphabetize. Make sure you do things in the right order. Give it a shot at hanging indent, and just kind of keep it calm. We'll also have some fun a little bit later on with quoting and paraphrasing, and so you'll have some labs and such for that as well. So um, hang in there, do what you can. If it really frustrates you to no end, put it down for a couple hours. Go have a cup of tea, come back, try again. Um, Make sure that you're asking questions, but make sure also that you're doing your own due diligence to walk through the instructions, to look things up, to try to find what you're supposed to do with these. And we'll see how it goes. I'm looking forward to reading your papers. I'm looking forward to helping you through this little bit here. And just know that you're not alone and you're not the first and you won't be the last. MLA is a little bit picky, not hard, but it does take a little bit of time to kind of walk through things. So be easy to yourself, be nice to yourself, and just give yourself time. It'll be fine. Hope you have a great day. Bye.